There we go.
Well, welcome all you folks out there in TV land to steal a line from the NHL, I believe. It's great to have this chance to chat with you a little bit about what's been going on in the Faculty of Science. So the alumni out there, welcome back. Wish that we could be doing this live, but this is the next best thing. And what we're going to talk about is kind of really relevant to the fact that we aren't live right now. So there's going to be a trip through things that have happened in science in the last little while. Some people you recognize, a bunch will be new. Like Kyla said, if you like, you can scan the little QR code there and get the ARitize app ready to go. And then you can actually participate in some of the augmented reality that we're going to present. But before we get going too deep into all that, we'll go to the next slide and we'll do a land acknowledgement. And so today's the day before a really important day in this country. So tomorrow is the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And, you know, there's so much deep history that it behooves us to learn more. So if you're thinking about tomorrow, I would encourage everybody to get informed, start down that path or continue down. If you're already on the path to understanding the history and the current situation for our Indigenous sisters and brothers in this land. Locally, there is a tradition to acknowledge that Ontario is part of the Dish with One Spoon treaty. And that was a treaty whereby the First Nations peoples of Ontario decided that they'd live in peace and mutual support. And later on, settlers like myself are invited into sharing the same treaty and basically understanding that our land is precious and to treat it that way and make sure that we're all sharing in the bounty and in the preservation of this land. If you've got a hideous orange t-shirt, like some of us do, I'd encourage people, if you're comfortable doing so, to wear it tomorrow. And that's a further sign of support and allyship. And science is a true ally. So thanks for that. And next slide, please, Paul. So all sorts of cool stuff going on in this fabulous Faculty of Science. I've been here for 3 years myself, and I've learned so much about the resilience, the diversity in this faculty, and the innovation. And I've got a couple of stories just to tell you about things that we've been doing recently. So things may be changed. If you're a recent grad, maybe you might recognize some of the people that I'm talking about. If you graduated a decade or more ago, there's like 3/4 of these 4 people are new hires. And in fact, in the last 3 years, we've basically regenerated over 20% of the professors in the Faculty of Science. And so there's all sorts of great, authentic science research stories happening. This is just a little taster of some of the things that are going on. So firstly, in the Department of Chemistry and Biology, there's Professor Roxana Schuring. She came to us from Sweden. And she's doing really cool analytical chemistry, studying microplastics. And how they make their way into the Arctic. You know, and I'm sure you've heard about huge islands of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, the size of Texas, for example. You know, and this is certainly something that humans have created. And as they break down, as you can imagine, as good scientists, down into little micro pieces, they can disperse everywhere. And they seem to be accumulating in the Arctic. And Roxana's research is trying to figure out why that is, and are there species-specific ways in which these plastics make their way to the Arctic, and how can we develop policy that helps protect the Earth against these biohazards? Next up in the Department of Molecular or Medical Physics is Professor Miranda Kirby. She's Canada Research Chair in Medical Physics. And her stuff is super cool as well. So if you've been lucky enough or unlucky enough to have an MRI, for example, and you've had a look at those things, you know there's slices, there's so much data on you from an MRI. And Miranda's research is how do we extract the maximum possible information out of those amazing images? And presumably then that will lead to better diagnoses of conditions. So she's doing really cool stuff. Again, like Roxana, very interdisciplinary. She's spanning math, computer science, physics, and healthcare, all rolled into one. Super proud of those two. Next is Professor Nariman Farsad in the Department of Computer Science. He's doing leading edge artificial intelligence research and communicating via virtual reality. And he's also building essentially a computer, if you will, a calculating box out of chemical reactions rather than electrons. And that opens a whole new way of thinking about how AI might work. And in a sense, it becomes a little bit cyborg to think about. And so that's super cool. And finally, in the Department of Mathematics, Professor Pavel Pralat, and he's been working on COVID-related research and trying to figure out mathematical models that more accurately predict pandemic situations. And these kind of models would be the ones that governments would use in order to say whether, yes, for sure, we can come back to work in campus in January in the safest possible way, or no, the trajectories look good, but there's another wave coming and we better hang tight for a little bit longer. So really doing great stuff. On to the next slide, which is showing more imagery of the kind of great spaces that we have in the Faculty of Science. Some of you have probably roamed Kerr Hall recently or back in the day, and these images probably don't look a whole lot like the Kerr Hall that you imagined. That's because these ones are from the Mars facility, where a bunch of our health-related research is going on. And you know, Kerr Hall has been great. It's venerable. It's got a beautiful quad, like it's almost like Hogwarts when you walk around Kerr Hall and inside it. And I'm foreshadowing an image of myself that's going to come up later that has a little bit of Dumbledore vibe to it as well. But we'd like to create more space that looks like the image that you're seeing right now. And the only way to do that in downtown Toronto is to build a new building. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the Science Discovery Complex as well. And yeah, thanks, Paul. So I've got a few slides, a few images of the architect's renderings of what this new building looks like. It's been in the works for better part of a decade now. The last 5 years, it's been the #1 priority of Ryerson to get this thing built. And we're getting really close to breaking ground on this. With a little bit of luck, 2022 will have us see shovels in the ground. And so the building, the site is at the corner of Jarvis and Dundas. So on the left-hand panel there, you can see a tall building with a podium beside it. And that is the Science Discovery Complex. Basically, the bottom third of that large tower is for science activities, and the top 2/3 are residences for our students. We need more space for our students to stay. And that's good. And basically 9 floors of hardcore science in this building. Some of them will be new laboratories for undergrads, research facilities for chemistry and biology and mathematics, research facilities for physics. And also we're imagining a new department, or maybe not a new department, but certainly a new program. And part of which is addressing cyber threats. And so essentially, we're imagining a program that gets students to understand what it's like to be a cyber criminal so that you can catch the cyber criminals. And I'm kind of likening that to building a pirate ship inside this building. And we'll see, again, foreshadowing stuff to come. How do you put a ship in a bottle like this? On to the next slide, Paul, if you don't mind. Yeah, a couple more renderings of the kind of activity that you'll see at the building. So another angle from the street. On the lower part of the building, it's actually on the main floor looking into the science gallery. And that's where the collision of art and science will come together and explore new ways to communicate and listen to our community on science. And then the grand stairwell you see looking down the stairwell onto the main floor. Again, a great gathering place that we encourage alumni community members to be able to come in and tell us your stories. It's not just about us as professors telling what's going on in science and what great solutions we have, but also listening to the stories of our community, the needs and the ideas. And so that's one of the main themes of this building is basically building community and community as it might relate to science activities. So we're super enthusiastic about the way this building is taking shape, and we're very close to getting it done. Strong commitment from the university. If you have communications about this building, if you have ideas, then at the end of this session, there'll be contact information for myself, and you can feel free to reach out and we can talk more about it. Very exciting though. On to the next slide. All right, so part of this is my story, and part of this is Paul's story, and part of this is the story of Paul and Dave and, and how this thing called RALE came into being. So I'll give you a little bit of a background. It's kind of been my vibe and philosophy that that you learn by doing things, and in science, it's certainly true. You know, and maybe in Western education, we've done a little bit too much of the fail-safe experiences for students. You know, foolproof labs that nothing can ever go wrong in, and yet students still find a way to push those boundaries. Real science is real experimentation where the outcomes aren't known. And in a number of courses, that means literally hands-on experience, collecting and manipulating data. And so I wanted to get every undergrad the opportunity to experience, you know, what others would call research, that's authentic science. And we're heading down there, great guns, and then the pandemic hit, and everybody's at home, you know, and you can do a little bit of in your kitchen kind of science, but basically we went to fully online experiences for our students. And that really knocked me back. How do we get the philosophy of hands-on authentic learning into students through a video link up? You know, and what a lot of folks were doing were making great videos of somebody else doing a lab for them, for example. And Paul and I thinking about this, and him being the president of Next Tech AR, world experts in the development of augmented reality, we asked ourselves, is there an AR approach to this that can get students some sort of three-dimensional experience of the labs that they're going through, particularly for chemistry and biology and physics? And so we hashed out a plan for that about 2 years ago, and it's literally blown up in a way that we could never imagine. And it's a really cool story, a very Ryerson story, where we pivoted on the point, and I had to pivot my brain in order to accept that most of what we're going to be doing for what turned out to be the next 18 months is going to be online. So how can we do that in a really cool and engaging way? So I'm going to pass it over to Paul now to talk a little bit more about this story, and I'll chirp in from time to time just because I like to bug him, but also you know, I might have some insight into things. So over to you, Paul. Great to see you.
Yeah, and chime in anytime you want. You speak way more elegantly than I do. But thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time tonight. I too am a former I am an alumni. And you know, so when Dave suggested, you know, we see what we can do with augmented reality, you know, I got excited. And you know, I'm a graduate of the Applied Computer Science program way back in the day. It was like 1989. So much of this stuff, even back then, was just pure fiction or science fiction, perhaps. But today it's real. So I'll take you on a brief, maybe 5 to 10 minute journey here, but we're going to show a little bit about I call it the recent past. So when Dave knocked on the door and said, hey, what if, kind of where we're at currently, and then a little glimpse into how we're viewing the future, you know, over the next, call it 12 to 36 months. But in the recent past, what Dave had done is he had said, look, you know, to his earlier point, I really want the students to have an opportunity to experience a lab, to go through one, to fail, to experiment, to play with it, but stream it into their environment because we're just prohibited from pulling everybody together. And that was the genesis of what today we call RALE, which is the Ryerson Augmented Learning Experience, full web-enabled platform, you know, hybrids directly to your phone. So, you know, the reason we were asking everybody to utilize their smartphone was to simply take advantage of the fact that we've commingled a web interface with a phone and use that really as the delivery vehicle. And that's how we got started. We began working with chemistry, physics, biology, biochemistry, and it's sort of taken on a little bit of a life from there. But I'll run this video, I'll talk over it, and it'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of what we did basically last year. And that's RALE, the learning experience itself. These are actual footage of the experiments. Kids literally trigger it from the screen. They can pull in a microscope, they can pull in anything. They have a web interface fully integrated into their student learning system. So it's very easy for them to access. They can utilize all the traditional videos, live streaming, pre-records, but the real magic happens when they scan that QR code, the QR code. And what it will do is it will actually pull up a targeted private lesson for them. They can go in, they can play with it, they can learn by doing, they can even go back into the system, download manuals if they want, student guides, etc. Even take assessments online if they wish. So it's a fully encompassed learning experience. And this is sort of how we began the journey. The response to it was very strong. What we discovered was that, really we didn't have to actually stop at labs. Dave mentioned earlier his Dumbledore comment there. I'll just kill the volume. I just shot this basically in our lobby yesterday. It's a very, simple example of not only can we bring in actual lab material, but we can bring in a lab instructor, we can bring in a faculty member, a subject matter expert, and they can literally be popped into any location. You can hear them speaking through your phone. And if you want to try this one, feel free to, click the QR code there, just point your camera at it. And from the camera, the QR code will trigger, and you can just find a spot on the floor you want to place Dave, it'll anchor and he'll appear. And then pinch and zoom him. I like playing with him when he's about 2 feet tall. So it's kind of fun. And all sorts of photos and, embarrassment, etc. It's all good. But that's the human hologram. But let's talk a little bit about sort of the labs, because this is really, what we were looking to do. And I'll run this video twice as I talk through it. So those that want to try the QR code to actually walk through a bit of a dissection on this flower, feel free. But ultimately, the idea here, guys, was we wanted to work with the faculty and create a workflow and a pipeline that would allow us here at Next Tech and at Ryerson to produce all the labs that you're seeing here. There's a number of them, 50 or more. I think we've probably got almost 100 of them planned and in the queue. So it's a substantial body of learning experiences. They cover all sorts of topics and types, predominantly, obviously, chemistry, biology, and biochemistry. But as you can see here, it's not just using microscopes, it's virtually everything that's available to you in the lab. And there's a number of different ways that we can play with these. But this was the core group that we set out to sort of tackle. Go into the year one, give the new students an opportunity to experience it and be a little bit hands-on. Obviously not even close to being in the lab, but it's a good surrogate, a good proxy for them. And more importantly, it gave them the ability to have the experience in the moment. And that was very important. We found that the feedback from that was extraordinary. So we did plenty of these labs. They were very well received. When we began designing the overall product, we had a number of types of outcomes that we were looking for. And I won't bore you to death with everything that's on this screen, but the top left is probably the most important. It just gave the students an increased confidence in their lab skills. And that's important because when they're not able to actually go to the lab, we could bring the lab or the lab experience to them. And the ubiquity of the smartphone, tiered with the delivery of online learning, just meant for a perfect ability for us to deliver that. So the results were great. We were super encouraged coming out of the first year. Obviously, everything we did, as you can imagine, we sought feedback pretty much at every step of the process. So if you can think about it, within the first maybe 2 weeks, Dave and I and others on the team were getting the feedback. Students are students. They're not going to hold back. They'll tell you exactly what they think. And as we continued to go through that process, we got some great feedback from them to help better iterate the design and then the delivery of all of these labs. And that continues today. It's a great ecosystem for us to work in. And it wasn't just the students. We got an awful lot of great feedback working with faculty. And I think this is actually the reason everything came together and worked so well. So, props to all the faculty on here. Sean McFadden, we got Rob, Karen, Angelica, Miriam. Some of you folks might even know these folks from your time at Ryerson. But the truth of it is they work day and night with our teams basically to create these experiences. And the output of that is that we've got this phenomenal workflow now that we can build labs and continue to enhance the levels of interaction, the levels of learning, the pedagogy around it. So it's a truly integrated experience right now, and it's coming out at scale. And so that's basically what we did for the last, I would say, 18 months. Where we're at today is pretty crazy. And I'll give my hat, tip my hat here to Dave on this. It was his idea pretty much from the start. The concept being he wanted to build a lab builder for the students. I'll go into the science of it after I show you this video. But things have really elevated. And two things happened sort of up to this point today. The first, and I think it's a very strong validation to Dave and the team at Ryerson, is that the Ontario government came knocking. And they all know that this is a systemic issue across all forms of higher education. That is the ability to experience labs in a remote setting. And when Dave was able to demonstrate what had occurred at Ryerson, we were granted some budget to actually build a lab builder. Of course, we're going to use their Ryerson, and I imagine in time other schools will have access to it through this Ontario program. But it's a very strong validator by third parties that we're on the right track. So let me give you a little vision, not even a vision, let me just show you kind of how this works. And again, I'll talk over it. Again, full online system. The students can log into it. And this will literally teach them how to build their own science lab while they're building a science lab. And the output of this program is for them to have their own lab created, published, and displayed. And it's a wonderful twist for the student because they're able now to not just learn and do a lab, they can create the lab from scratch. And obviously, as Dave will talk about, there's a lot of theory that goes into the benefits of that. But at the end of the day, from a student's point of view, they are literally getting to bedrock around what that lab is all about, what the science is telling them, what the science is teaching them, and then they're building their own instruction from that process. So it's a very powerful vehicle for delivery. We've been piloting it over the summer with a number of students. I would call it a relatively small cohort to really understand the feedback. Today we're finished. We're going to roll it out start of October, literally next week, to the next big cohort at Ryerson, released into the wild. The response that we've received so far from the students is that we've got roughly about 80 plus 85% acceptability on the platform. So it's comfortable to use, it's easy for them, it's self-guiding, etc. But the big benefit is, and this is where we put a lot of the effort in, is working with the faculty and with the teams, we were able to create lesson plans that met a 94% approval rating. In other words, the students, as they go through it, scored these incredibly high. And that's a real benefit going back to the faculty because they're the ones that are literally working with us to composite and construct these actual lessons. So kudos to that. And Dave, maybe this is a great spot for me to, maybe have you pop in and talk a little bit about this whole concept of learn by doing and some of the benefits that we're hopeful that we'll see coming out of this experience.
Yeah, cheers, Paul. And like I appreciate the nods, but it's really the Next Tech team that they made this happen. It was a dream.
It was good collaboration.
Truly, yeah. And it's been so cool to see our team build these labs and then imagine that students could be doing exactly the same thing and get deeply into experimental design without having to go into a lab. Eventually they will, and they can deploy these ideas literally in the lab. But in the meantime, you can spend your weekend imagining, ideating, and then creating not just the AR objects, but the entire lab experience themselves. And this can be true, like for students and for faculty in other universities. Everybody's going to want to think about online education, and that might not be, and in my view, never will replace hands-on. But imagine like a pre-lab where you see things in 3 dimensions and you've rendered them, and basically you're virtual realitying your way into that pre-lab. That's so much more powerful than reading it or watching a video of something. And just the learning by building and doing. You never learn something as well as you do when you have to teach it to somebody else. And in the process of creating the labs themselves, that's exactly what the students are doing. So I believe there's going to be a depth of understanding that'll be unparalleled by using AR in an experimental design kind of setting and using design thinking in that way. Yeah, sky's the limit right now.
We're all, suitably excited to see where this goes. The early feedback on the small cohort we ran through it was, obviously, as you can see here, these are smart numbers rolled up from dozens of different metrics we measure. But the truth of it is, I think we've got a winner here. Dave's vision of literally letting the student learn by doing in this capacity and building from ground up is critical to the process. And we've got literally 50 plus labs already built using this particular builder. So there's a vast inventory from which the kids can play with and learn and iterate. So we're very excited about this. I think the knock on that we'll see will be, sort of a propagation, within the community, the science community, for, certainly folks looking to build these style of labs. But let me take you, now into a little bit of the glimpse of the near future. I'm sure you've all heard this term metaverse, but let me anchor this in a little bit of context. So, we spoke early about the recent past, right when COVID hit, what would we do? How would we react? To Dave's point, a hard pivot into the world of online. How do we bring online into, the student's location so that they can experience as much of this sort of lab as possible? And RALE 1.0 was born and, sort of launched on that thesis. And then we developed enough of these labs and got enough strong feedback and validation that we created I'll call it a lab builder tool to continue to go out and sort of build this, but more at scale. Now, when we look into the near future, so 12 to 36 months from now, it's very clear that, this idea of low cost, lightweight eyewear wearables, or perhaps, anything that will sit in front of your field of view, that you can superimpose that lab or that augmented experience on, is going to become a fairly common display format. And regardless of what the marketing hype and the terms are, you could call it a metaverse, a point cloud, or spatial computing. But the truth of it is, the location that you as a student will actually be in will likely have some form of point cloud around it, some spatial computing environment in 3 dimension that, you can literally either take your eyewear or your phone and you can move around, and anchored within that space will be the augmented reality experiences. And these could be people, these could be lab lessons, they could be a combination of both. But this is a super exciting time because this is not something new and novel at Next Tech or frankly, even at Ryerson. This is a rotation that is happening globally across all planks of technology. And so it's natural that we would see it become available to us in the world of higher ed. And so here's some thinking about what's actually happening right now using these labs. It's kind of cool. And again, I don't want to make this a Next Tech presentation. I'm just going to show you some tech that we have that, essentially enables, quote unquote, the metaverse. But this could basically be Microsoft's HoloLens. This could be the Facebook Oculus. This could be a variety of different devices on your phone. But it's all sort of coming together now, which is kind of super cool. In this video, what I'm showing you is we have a product that you can take your phone and actually videotape a space. My office, the front of the lobby there, and then you ingest the video and it creates a point cloud, a mini or localized metaverse within that area. And then here I'm able to select it, drop in wayfinding. This is actually a hologram. The young lady on the right there, that's actually Mariana. She's in Vancouver. This is her beamed in to the front of that building. And now I'm using the wayfinder to go into it. And then I can take the same technology and do a video of one of Dave's labs. And literally, as I'm scanning the lab, I'm able to ingest that, create a point cloud, and now pull in one of the labs that we've actually built in the AR Lab Builder and deliver it right into the lab session. And this is super relevant because what it allows us to do now is expand the whole experience. This is an example of the same lab coming in through HoloLens. I'm literally looking at a room, I'm mapping it, I'm conforming the space, and when I'm locked, I'm able to drop the lab. And now, because I've mapped my hand, I can move around and actually open up portions of that flower as part of the lab dissection. And when I'm done with it, if I wish, I can even pick it up and put it onto the floor and play with it there. Again, all through a field of view over my eyes. So this is a bit of a glimpse into where things are going and where they're headed, but it's a phenomenal way to take what we did at RALE 1.0, validate the use case, see the feedback from the students and the faculty, iterate that into a builder tool that now allows us to bring that into the student's lab where they can learn even deeper, but more importantly, they can build more labs. And now we're looking at what will happen over the next 12 to 36 months as a way to experience it. So even when we go back into the lab, we've got the opportunity to use and expand or even exploit this capability to a much broader set of use cases. And I think, Dave, you had a great one that I really thought was relevant. I'll talk over that while we're spinning the video up here. But, safety is a very big issue in labs, and particularly when you're in, I'll call it year one. And so with this type of technology, what Sean, Rob, Karen, and the others can do is they can actually design AR experiences purposely that fail. And they show what happens in the lab when things go horribly wrong. And they can show it through AR so that obviously it's just digital, so no one's actually really getting injured, but it's very visceral because it's in the moment. They're in the space. They can see it. It's photorealistic, but it's built for them to experience. And that's the key benefit to this whole learning effort. And that's, kind of where we think this will go. We're excited about it. And Dave, if there's anything you want me to, or anything you want to chime in on, basically we can roll from there.
Yeah, no, that's great, Paul. I think we've probably said plenty. It's it's a lot to digest, but like we're visual learners too, and I think that's a part of it. That's, I'm sure people in my research group are rolling their eyes right now because that's what I always say. Oh, I'm a visual learner. But it's true, and seeing these things. And I think that to your final point, having that HoloLens experience, like you can literally be in the lab, be looking at the cloud version of the lab and have a chemistry experiment explode. And then you learn how to get out of that without having to experience the explosion. So it's so much more powerful to see that and know to react. So yeah, I'm really, for training for safety outside of a university environment too. So many options. But I think I think probably this is a great place to take a breath for now and see people are digesting stuff. If there are questions, comments, we're happy to vibe with you for another half an hour or so. So I'll maybe should I pass it over to Kyla, who might be tracking any online chatter that's going on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you both, David and Paul. That was an excellent presentation, very eye-opening. I do have some questions here, so I will throw it over to both of you. Both or one of you, feel free to respond to these questions as I share them. So first question, I guess, is where to next, and what does the future of higher education and AR look like?
Well, I could riff on that all day, but Dave is the future of higher ed, so maybe you want to run that.
Yeah, like my mind is just so blown open by all of this and expanded, and I think the science fiction part of having your heads-up display, like I hope we aren't wearing shields still like in the future, but there could be heads-up displays on face shields that people are wearing, and then metadata pops up. You're in the chem lab and you're grabbing some some reagent, and all the info could pop up right there. You could basically wink your eye at it and see that as well. But I think the beauty is actually going to be in something that we didn't think of until we thought of the builder. And I think letting students use their creative juices, and even maybe their artistic side in ways to learn science in a different way, or the way that's right for them. I think that opens things up in ways that we can't imagine yet. Like this is all fabulous for remote learning, et cetera, et cetera. But I think students get a hold of being able to build stuff, and it's gonna go crazy, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that, why I was very, very excited about the lab builder is it's a creator tool. And, we're seeing this, I see it just at my perch at Next Tech, every day, the almost globalization of, creator tools, not just in entertainment and education, but I see it in all forms of product. And what's super interesting is that there is literally a logarithmic scale of adoption. And that's why I'm excited about the lab builder, because I think, Dave, that's what we'll see over the next 12 to 24 months is we're not going to get 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 students. We'll probably do that very quickly, but in truth, we'll get hundreds, then thousands. And then the tool itself is ubiquitous. It's I think at the end of the day, it has the potential to be like a YouTube style channel where students can build labs, publish them, and push them out into the community globally. And that may be getting a bit ahead of myself, but I've seen these things before, and that's how they happen. And I think that's going to be phenomenal for education. I think we're all, anybody that's involved in the world of education knows, education wants to be set free. It wants to be given and delivered. Knowledge wants to be made available. And this is just all part of that sort of ethos. And I'm just really excited about the ability to work with Ryerson, but I'm also excited to see the response we're getting from the students. And, that to me is a real, benefit or net benefit of the whole experience. Yeah.
And Dave, you had shared information at the beginning of the presentation on the new Science Discovery Complex, which will be home to the Faculty of Science. Could you speak to the anticipated use of this new technology in the building?
Yeah, back to the pirate ship, hey? So like you probably saw it in your minds, right? So if you can mesh out maybe it's not literally a pirate ship, but it could be. You can mesh that into a floor. Basically we could create a holodeck like from Star Trek, and have students experience that. The building is meant to be full of data flow as well. Like that's part of the thinking of science in an integrated fashion. So students in a chem lab might be developing materials that could be used to measure health outcomes in a physics lab or a biology lab, for example. Things are going to be shipped around from one spot to the next. Being able to visualize big data in a different way and experience that. So I think it's tech like this is going to be deeply integrated into the new building. And I've always I've started to think that lines of sight in large lecture theaters won't necessarily be a thing anymore. If everybody can bring up, like a little mini Dave or a nano Dave or whatever, on their device as they're sitting in the lecture theater, you can still talk to each other as students, and the prof will be there live for sure. But you don't have to worry about whether you can see the screen very well or not, because you could basically have everybody have their own personal lecture right in front of them. I don't know, Paul, you've seen stuff like that already out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that video I showed you, we're building those style of metaverses right now. They're localized. We dub them internally mini metaverses, local to the point where they're roughly about a 30-meter kind of circle, if you would think of a 30-meter sphere. It's really where the tech sort of limits out. That's the edge condition for the point cloud. But that's going to continue to grow and get bigger. I just think it's just getting started, Dave. The Science Discovery Center, the whole complex is, by the time it's done, there's going to be so much interplay between, AR, physical, virtual, the people's behavior on when they come in, how they experience findings, learnings, meetings, meetups, informal or formal. It's all going to change. It won't happen overnight. It'll be like a decade's worth of a rotation. But it's going to be super interesting to see how that impacts learning, science, and sort of all sorts of communications. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And another question I have here. So COVID-19 has widened the gap in access to education, with various sections of the world's populations not being online. With this technology being deployable on a mobile device, do you see potential to narrow that gap and take AR in higher education to the masses?
Well, 100%. There's other elements there in that comment about access that the mobile phone's not going to resolve, for folks that are remote. But definitely, and it was purpose by design, the most ubiquitous device on the planet is the phone. And, being able to have an app that can run virtually all of the thumbnails you see on the screen right now, with a level of interactivity. They're not passive little videos you watch. You're actually experiencing walking around, pinching, zooming, etc. Without a doubt, that completely opens up the aperture of who can participate. So if that can help bring the threshold down globally, that's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
So a comment here, this is very cool technology. Absolutely it is. Curious to know how AI affects privacy, or AR rather, affects privacy in general.
So that's a good question. And I can tell you this from firsthand experience working with the team at Ryerson on this. They are very, very strict when it comes to data privacy. It's a months long exercise to go through any kind of gathering of data and sharing of data. And I mean, it's essentially rock solid. So, rest assured, first and foremost, none of these experiences capture, track, or measure anything from a privacy point of view. They simply allow you to go through the experience, and then in some of them we don't even score. We just let you go through the experience, and then you have to manually put out your responses specifically for privacy. So they're virtually anonymous. But that is an area that not just at Ryerson we deal with all the time. And I can tell you from our company's experience. I mean, we work with NATO and other pretty large government organizations. Info security is a big issue, and we don't treat it lightly. So there's virtually, how do I say this? It's pretty secure.
Yeah, and I guess the other side of it too is like we would never track data from anybody without their knowing it, right? But some of that data can be like really important for us to understand the impact of what's going on. So if it would help us to be able to understand, like how long a student was staying on an AR object, or in what way they were using it by kind of tracking angles of viewing and stuff like that, that in itself could be a research study in the deployment of AR. But there's ethics that we have to get sign off on. So like it would certainly never be done without a student's knowledge. But this is part of us learning in this new paradigm of what's working and what isn't. And so the power of being able to track interactions with the person interacting, knowing that that's being tracked, is going to be super powerful for us as well.
Yeah. And I love some of the, David, we could speak to, we don't have to, but as an anecdote, when we first rolled some of these labs out, as I mentioned earlier, students are pretty vocal. They tell you straight up, this sucks. Or, hey, this worked really good. Could we do some more of this? So, the idea of actually tracking was, didn't even come across, because as we were testing it, they were like messaging us, telling us this was good, this wasn't. So it was pretty immediate, the feedback. And anybody that's built product before knows that, that's the feedback you want. You You don't want all the flowery stuff. You want to know what's not working so that you can correct or improve it. And frankly, students are great at that. They'll tell you straight up, especially if they're on their phone. They'll just swip to the messaging app and let you know.
Thanks, Paul. Can these experiences be deployed on most mobile devices, or do individuals need the latest smartphone or tablet to access them?
No, I mean, yes, you can deploy them on, pretty much. I think you can go as far back as an iPhone 6. I don't know if anybody's actually got one. I'm on I think it's an 8 or a 9, something like that. Maybe it's an X, 3-year-old phone. So no, there was two things when we were baselining this. First, most students, some may want to have the latest and greatest phone, but the practical aspect of that is they don't. And the truth of it is, we wanted it to run on Android and iOS devices, so both phones and tablets. And we did have, some of the older phones. It was just slower, took a lot longer to download, render the object, but nothing that degraded the experience. And I think what we ended up doing is sort of settling down on roughly something that was, devices that are typically 36 months and newer is what we baselined, but that doesn't mean they won't run on older phones. It'll just run slower.
Yeah, and it brings up a good point. Like when all this was coming down, and then everybody was just like flying by the seat of their pants. Ryerson across the university deployed a bunch of smart devices to students. Like we sent them out by courier so that they could participate in this kind of thing, or just like if they needed connectivity, we sent hotspots out there as well. And that's another thing that I love about this university. Like we think about the students first, second, third, fourth, like every thought that we had during the pandemic was how do we get the students the best experience that we can given the situation. So we tried to make this as accessible to everybody and flatten that field as much as we could.
And you've both certainly alluded to this, but with institutions slowly looking at returning to face-to-face learning, do you still see a need for this technology in the future?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'll let Dave speak to whether they're going to use it in the future, but the truth of it is, one of probably the I would say most endorsing outcomes of this from the students was that they themselves said, in their mind, this was the new norm. I'm going to have an augmented reality version of my in-person lab. And I can use it before I go to the lab. I can use it while I'm at the lab. Oh, and then I can use it after the lab for any form of refresher or post-lab learning. And so, and that's not uncommon. I mean, we hear that in a variety of formats around learning and training outside of higher ed. So it would reason that it would become valuable from that perspective. As to whether Dave and the faculty want to continue to use it, Dave, that's up to you.
Yeah, it's hard to go back. And I think we always had a mind to post-pandemic on this too. Like the simplest one was that these things would be used in a pre-lab experience. But again, like you have these thoughts and they're great, and they're maybe even 3-dimensional thoughts. But then as soon as you deploy the thing into the real experience with real students, then all these other possibilities come up. So like for sure, nothing will replace literal hands-on learning. Like you can virtual reality landing a 747 a lot. That doesn't mean you can land a 747. But by God, like the difference between doing your simulator and reading a book about landing a plane, that's huge. So it's here to stay for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think whether, it's just, I actually just think it's going to become the new norm for students. And, once it's out released, that's why I think the AR Lab Builder itself as a creator tool will help propagate the momentum of that, because the students themselves will build the labs that other students will use. And that's going to be an enormously interesting time. Doesn't mean that, we won't do it with the faculty. They will absolutely be the top drawer, but when students start building labs and other students start using them, that's a marvelous moment, you know?
Thank you both so much. That is it for the questions that have come through the chat. We do have a few more minutes if there are any final questions that anyone viewing right now would like to submit. Otherwise, I will hand it back over to Dave for our closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Kyla. And thanks, Paul. So yeah, like I also understand that, you know, people are going to think about this, digest it, you know, have a tea or a beer. And so like thoughts will come to mind, ideas, comments, whatever. And so we would love to hear further feedback and engagement with these ideas or anything about science that you'd like to tell us. So to that end, you know, an email is probably the best, easiest way to get a hold of me. So my address is up there, and I do look at all my emails. And so like, be assured that I'll get back to you on that. And, you know, maybe we can, in the not too distant future, meet up for a coffee at Balzac's or something like that. So I'm really thankful for all the support in putting this together. For everybody out there that's taken the time out of their day to engage, and it's great to virtually see alumni, you know, coming back onto campus and hopefully literally soon. I hope everybody has like a fabulous rest of their week, rest of the month, you know, leading up to the new year. I'd say like, believe in science, stay safe, put on that orange t-shirt for tomorrow, and keep on keeping on.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate everything. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you both. Have a great evening, everybody.